What's happening, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Crossed Up, the final episode of Crossed Up, featuring Anthony Sanfilippo, Bob Wankel. We are packing up the boxes and we're moving across the street, I guess. We had mentioned previously that we were going to kind of end this show, and we're starting up another one. It's going to be called Fighting Words. Thank you, AI, for coming up with that title. I appreciate it. And look, we're going to do the exact same show, but as we pointed out last time, if you did listen, we want to own the show, which we currently do not. So we're going to jump over and we're going to work with Anthony's partner on Snow the Goalie, Rush Joy, kind of have it live in his ecosystem of podcasts that he does. We'll still be on YouTube. You'll still be able to get the show everywhere that you get podcasts, but we're going to be on a different feed. We'll have more information about how you can find us, but the pre-existing X account, we're going to switch it over so you can still get all the information through there and follow the show. We're looking forward to it. Anthony, I'll bring you in here if you have anything else you want to mention before we get into the Phillies. There's a lot to talk about. So
it's just a reminder. It's Fighting Words with a PH, like the Fightins.
Cute. I love a good Philadelphia sports play on words. So.
Yes,
I don't know if we talked about this on air last time, but man, like when it comes to starting up a new podcast and having to name it, it's such a dreadful process. Like if you're ahead of the curve and you're one of the first shows to go, you can come up with something that's pretty easy, pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But man, like you're sitting there and you're like, all right, like what's the tie-in? It's not Ashburn Alley. It's not Powder Blue. It's not, what is it?
And it's because everybody and their mother who's created a podcast, right, has already come up with a title that is similar to all those other Phillies kind of.
That's why I like Fighting Words. We're going to embrace debate.
Yeah.
We're going to manufacture debate. We're going to argue with each other, very first take style.
Yes.
I want to mimic my inspiration, Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless, and that's what we're going to do now.
Well, wait a second. I don't certainly know if I want to be associated with either of them.
Yes, no, we're good. We're going to do what we do, but I have a feeling that ahead of this season, things might get a little saucy at points. I don't think it's going to be smooth sailing, Anthony, so I think we probably will have some days where we're pretty fired up, or I'm certainly fired up, and you're going to have to talk me off the ledge a little bit, which is a perfect segue into what we want to talk about at the start of this show. You know how you get me to record a Phillies podcast? You tell me that Taijuan Walker is going to make the team, and then a few hours later tell me that Taijuan Walker might actually start games in the month of April. I cannot believe, and I should know better, but I cannot believe that we're doing this again. So why don't you break down what you see happening with Taijuan Walker, and then really burying the lead here, which is Ranger Suarez and his health and his continued issues with his back. How concerned should we be about this? I think pretty concerned, but go ahead, talk me.
I think you're spot on, Bob. You should be concerned, and I just got back from being down in Clearwater, and I don't know if maybe I was talking to anybody and everybody I could about the schedule that they had Ranger Suarez on. It just made no sense to me whatsoever. I even talked about it in our mailbag with Tim Kelly on Pattison. Like, I was perplexed by how Suarez was being used. I was down there for a week and never saw him pitch. He pitched on the backfield the same day as Zach Wheeler threw, which I believe was it wasn't Sunday. I think it was Saturday. And he pitched in an inter-squad game. Now, all of your major league players were playing in that Saturday game in Clearwater. So really, an inter-squad game is against minor league hitters. So why is Ranger Suarez throwing that game that day? And they were just saying, we wanted to get him his 60 pitches in 4 innings. It's exactly what we were looking for. And I'm sitting there going, bullshit. This is not, you're throwing everybody else in the order that they're going to pitch in the regular season. They had it lined up. Wheeler, Luzardo, because they want a lefty to split up the righties, Nola, Sanchez fourth, and only fourth so that he could start the home opener, which they still have yet to announce, but that's what it's going to be. And then Taijuan Walker was pitching that 5th day. And I kept saying, well, where's Suarez in this rotation? It doesn't make sense to me. And I was trying to figure out what it was. I didn't necessarily think injury. I was thinking, are they considering, because Matt Strum's banged up a little bit, maybe starting Suarez in the bullpen and make Walker start 1 or 2 games until Strom comes back? Like, that's where my head was going. I was not thinking that he was hurt, because I did see him, right? And he was pitching, he was throwing. So it's not like, Rangers down, and then all of a sudden, boom, they hit us with this yesterday. Well, let's see, the next 48 hours will tell us. When you hear those words, that sounds like IL to start the season.
Yeah, it certainly does. It feel like it's trending that way, and it just feels like in recent years that when the Phillies message things a certain way, you sort of know where it's headed. I would be surprised if you got news that, hey, he's just going to miss a start. We're actually not going to put him in the IL to start the season. Everything's fine. I don't. It could be very wrong. I don't expect to get that news. And I guess what's really interesting is, last season, Aaron Nola made 33 starts. Ranger Suarez made 27. So he only missed 6 starts last year. So I don't want to get into this whole thing about durability, though he only made 22 starts the year prior. The issue is that not about the time missed, it was that he was ineffective when he came back. And I mean, just look at what he did in the second half of last season. He had made 8 starts and he had a 5.65 ERA. And I know he gutted out that start for 4 innings against the Mets in the postseason, but I wouldn't say that he was exactly sharp. It was kind of like a magic act to get him, clean to the middle, or get them clean to the middle of the game. And so coming into the season, I sort of was willing to turn the page, and I said, I still like Ranger Suarez. I still have a lot of belief in him. And the fact that he's not necessarily your number 3 starter makes me like him even more. Or the fact that he might not even necessarily be your number 4 starter makes me like him even more. But I do have some concern now in that this is a pattern. This is a pattern of setbacks with him, with injury issues. We're not even through the month of March now, and we're dealing with something that we've seen in the past. And we can talk about the Phillies' depth, and we know that Andrew Painter's coming, and that's great. It just leads us to not only is Ranger Suarez potentially going to miss time, and we don't know how much, and we don't know if this is going to be a recurring issue or something that's going to continue to be problematic into 25, but now it opens the door for Taijuan Walker, who could have not had a more poorly timed blow-up outing yesterday, in which he just looked like Taijuan Walker. And so for all of the reports about the velocity being up, and he dedicated himself this winter, and all of that's true, right? Like, I'm sure he did dedicate himself. I'm sure he has something to prove. I know that these are numbers. It's data. It's not a subjective thing. Like, he was throwing harder. But at the end of the day, like, come on, we all know what this is. Yeah. And we're going to have to do this again? I mean, there were times last year where I said, Anthony, there's no way. In August of last year, there's no way we will ever see this guy again. And not only might we see him again, but we might see him start. It is just crazy.
Yeah, and it was funny. I had this conversation down in Florida too. I was like, I can't believe how much time we spend talking and writing about Taijuan Walker.
About a guy who's a depth piece in the starting rotation. Yeah, I agree. I cannot believe that we spent that much time talking about it last year. But part of the reason was, hey, like, what do you want to do? You want to talk about inconsistencies in chase rates? Like, we can do that. It certainly would have. It certainly proved to be a valid concern, but when you're on your way to 95 wins in a division title coast to coast, it's like, hey, we got to pick apart some of the negative things here, and that tended to be the most negative, prominent issue. But I just don't want to do it again this year. I don't want to do this again this year. And let me just say this. I am sure he's a good guy from all accounts. The conversations that I have with people down there, he's a good teammate. He works hard. He wants to win. He has a lot of pride. This is not a personal attack on Taijuan Walker. It's an attack on the Philadelphia Phillies for giving him an atrocious deal and just not cutting the cord. Cut the cord. This is cheap. The Phillies are not a cheap organization. They spend a lot of money. This act in isolation is cheap. It is. Nobody wants to see this guy anymore. Nobody.
Yeah, it's so funny. I got to watch him pitch the game against the Yankees at Steinbrenner Field. And I thought he looked good. Yes, he gave up a home run in that game. But really, the home run was a 2-0 pitch. And he was like, well, I'm just going to throw a changeup here just because I want to throw a changeup. Not a spot he would normally throw that pitch. in that spot, and Ben Rice jumped all over it and hits it out of the park. But otherwise, for 4 innings against the Yankees in that game, he looked really good. And so that was his 3rd start of the spring. He had his velocity was up, and I'm not certain at that time we knew, or anybody knew, maybe the pitchers didn't even know, players didn't even know about Suarez's situation. And I wonder if all of a sudden Taijuan finds out that Rangers now maybe not going to start the season and he's going to be thrust back into the spotlight, and you face that same team 5 days later and they just smacked him around the ballpark. Get the 3 home runs, 9 hits. Like, it was just a horrible outing, an outing that we are used to seeing. And that's where I think you're right, Bob. It's like, this was a good story up until now.
Yeah.
And not just because it's one bad spring outing. It's a spring training game. You can always, you just dismiss them, right? But at the same time, it's just very interesting how you went from suddenly being the best story in camp to, oh, now I look like the same guy again.
Getting booed off the field in a spring training game. And you're right. You can't look too much into the net result of a spring training performance. But, like, when you piggyback that off of what has happened over the previous 2 years, it's hard not to. And I don't feel bad for Taijuan Walker on a professional level in that $18 million. Like, you can criticize me all you want, $18 million a year. Like, that's business. But I do feel bad for him in the sense that I think is going to be significantly harder for him to find some form of effectiveness in Philadelphia. If, like, let's just say there's a path forward for him as a major league pitcher. I don't know that there really is beyond whatever this stopgap situation for him is with the Phillies. But I just feel like going out and performing anywhere else across this sport would be much easier for him than it will be here, because every time there's a bad inning, every time that there's a double laced into the gap, every time there's a 4-pitch walk where he's nibbling and dancing around a batter, everybody is going to sit there in real time and go, oh shit, here we go again, this guy. And I almost feel like, for his sake, I almost wish for his sake, from a personal standpoint, he could have started over anywhere else and given it another shot this season. Because this mix here with him, I just don't think it's it. And, like, I know we just saw Brandon Graham end a 15-year career with the Eagles. Guys don't start out well. They can overcome it and they become beloved. Like, I just don't see that ending for Taijuan Walker, where he was a massive disappointment for 2 seasons, especially last year. Oh, and then all of a sudden he's going to find something. And, man, we were wrong about Taijuan. Look at what he was able to do for this team. Is it possible? Maybe, but, like, even as I just said, maybe, I highly doubt it.
Yeah, no, I agree, Bob. And I got to think that the Phillies have to – are they that blind that they don't see it? Like, they have to see what we're saying, right? Like, we're not saying anything profound here. It's not like we're like we've done this deep dive research into the mentality of the Philadelphia fan, and we've unearthed something that no one else has unearthed. It is blatantly obvious that this is how Taijuan Walker is going to be treated by this fan base. And why, if you're the Phillies, would you put him through that? Or even risk putting him through that? I understand you're paying him the money, but if you put him into a low leverage role in the bullpen, it's not nearly as bad, because then he's only going to come into a game when you're either blowing somebody out or you're getting blown out. It really won't matter at that point, right? So why put him into the situation where he has to be thrust into a spotlight when you could put someone else in that spot? And the guy that they picked up of waivers last year from the Marlins, Kyle Tyler, he's had a really nice camp. He's not stretched out to 6 innings, but the guy can give you, a 3-4 inning start, not be a problem. Nobody's going to boo the hell out of Kyle Tyler because they don't know who the hell Kyle Tyler is. If you want to do it with Nabil Krismat, who's looked good in spring training as well. Krismat was a starter in winter ball and pitched well in winter ball as a starter. He could probably give you 4 innings with no problem. Throw one of those guys into this role, and the fans aren't going to boo the hell out of them.
Look, I know that the month of April and March surviving early in the season is much different than going down the stretch and trying to create momentum going into the postseason, which we saw the Phillies really struggle to do. But let me just give this to you as a reset here. We talk about the Phillies' second half struggles a year ago. In the first half, they were 62-34 with a plus 110 run differential. In the second half, they were 33-33 with a plus 3 run differential. And we talk about how much the Phillies struggled and sort of sputtered going into October. And there's no doubt that is, in fact, what happened. But part of this is because it is hard to gain momentum, and it is hard to feel good and roll over positive performance after positive performance when you were sending him out to the mound as he was a season ago. I mean, think about the second half of that year. If they played 500 baseball over those final 66 games, Taijuan Walker made, I don't know, just spitballing here, somewhere probably between 8 to 12 starts just by the pure math. And I know that most of them did not go well. And so the Phillies are probably another 4 or 5 games better and maybe win 100 games if Taijuan Walker wasn't making those starts. And maybe they would not have had such a uneven, inconsistent, mediocre vibe and feeling going into the playoffs. And that's my only fear here. Like, if it's 2 or 3 starts and then he becomes a long man until whatever happens, he either pitches well and kind of becomes a viable part of that bullpen mix, or they just say, okay, now that's enough. We have to move on. So be it. If we're talking about this on April 15th and that's it, okay, fine. But if this is a prolonged thing where they keep going back to him and he's ineffective, I think that I'm not blaming Taijuan Walker on the fact that the Phillies couldn't bear down and focus and not chase horrible pitches in October against the Mets in that series. But the greater narrative was this team is just not the same. And if you remove those games, it actually looked a hell of a lot better than it really was. And I just would like to remove it. You talk about like the overall feeling and vibe and momentum, and I just don't think that this is good for it.
Yeah, you're not wrong. The Phillies, and this goes back to before the start of that second half, that 33-33. But I just looked it up. They lost each of his last 10 starts.
Yeah.
And that goes back into the end of May, but 10 starts that he made, they lost all 10 of them.
And to be completely clear, there were 1 or 2 off the top of my head that were like functional starts where they just didn't perform. But by and large, the vast majority of those starts, he buried them. You know, yeah. And not to mention, imagine coming to the park and knowing like, okay, I know what he's up against right now. I know where he's at, how he's pitching. Like sometimes you show up to the park and go, hey, we got a pretty good chance to win a ball game tonight. You know, when he was getting the ball, it was like, oh man, you know, yes, it's human nature. Like, I mean, it doesn't mean that they don't like the guy or they don't respect him as a professional, but like,
yeah,
you know, we have to be rooted in reality here as well. All right.
For sure.
So let me just real quick to kind of end that conversation, less about him and more about Ranger Suarez. What do you think? Like, do you think that this is a big red flag and it's going to be an issue that we see pop up again and again throughout the season? Or is this really nothing to be overly concerned about it? We just feel a little bit more amped up because we know what it means as a replacement.
I think that it's something to worry about because what we've learned, I think, about Ranger Suarez is he's got a shelf life for health. And whether it's he starts well and then he runs out of it, he gets injured or has issues as he gets to the end of the season, like last year, or he starts really slow and then picks up and then maybe gets a little bit of dead arm. Like whatever it is, there's always something with this guy.
Yeah.
And it's not saying that he's a bad pitcher because he's not a bad pitcher. He just can't stay healthy. And he's the one pitcher, Bob, when you look at the Phillies are really good about keeping their pitchers healthy. Really good, for the most part, about keeping pitchers healthy. And he's the one guy who is constantly under some sort of health duress. And I don't know if that's something that they just can't figure it out with him. I look at it and say, you're happy you get 100 innings out of Ranger Suarez.
So is it fair to say that the plan, if all goes according to plan, is that he comes back, let's just say he comes back mid-April. Maybe he doesn't miss a start. I don't know. I don't want to get too far out of ourselves here, but let's just say that's the likely outcome. He comes back, he makes 10 starts. It's Andrew Painter time. He slots into the rotation. Ranger kind of goes back into a more of like a hybrid role, swingman type. And that's the way that the Phillies go down the stretch in 25. Is that, you think, maybe a possible outcome here?
Yeah, well, I think so. Here's the thing. I think Painter's going to pitch in June. I do.
Okay.
The whole July-ish thing was the Phillies' way of giving themselves
A little breathing room, a little wiggle room.
7-8 weeks of leeway of they can do it any time in that frame. So I think that Andrew Painter's in this rotation by like around Father's Day. That's the week I think it's going to happen.
Obviously, other guys can get hurt. There could be 3 holes in the rotate. You just never know, right?
Right.
But for a 1-to-1 exchange, it's not going to be Zach Wheeler. It's not going to be Aaron Nola. It's not going to be Luzardo. Like, we know this, right? So the question becomes, if Ranger Suarez does become that, we'll call it swingman, if that's the right word. Play along here for a second. Ranger Suarez is a free agent this winter, correct?
Yes.
How thrilled do you think he's going to be about that? Not getting an opportunity to pitch every 5 days as he's going out to the market.
He's not going to be thrilled with it, and that's he switched agents and everything else. Like, I mean, I think it's a thing. Right. Yeah. But I think that the Phillies have kind of been setting us up for this for a while. I mean,
I think that the moment that Christopher Sanchez inked this extension, you knew, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
There's an inevitability to this.
Right. I mean, they've been letting us know, without saying it. They've been telling us when they signed Sanchez, Ranger's not going to be a long-term guy here. And I think we're seeing why. Because they just don't try. In a lot of ways, like Zach Eflin, Bob. And again, great guy, well loved in that locker room and well respected.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites, man.
Right? Like, really good dude. The Phillies were worried, and they made a mistake in signing Walker as the replacement for Eflin. But they were worried that Eflin's injury history would not make sense for them to sign him to a 3 or 4 year contract.
Right.
And so that's why they moved off of Eflin. I think that they're looking at Ranger Suarez in the exact same way. Like, we like the guy. We think he's good for whatever purposes we can use. We could find ways to use him and he'd be successful and help us win. But when it comes time to signing a guy for 4 years, we don't look at Ranger Suarez as a good investment.
Right.
And it's because of his health history. And I think that's really how they've looked at it. They've kind of let us know that without saying it out loud, and we're the ones that have to interpret what they're saying.
We're doing this condensed version of this show today because our jobs are pulling us to other things, like our careers are pulling us away from the show. There's a few other things that we have to talk about here quickly.
Yes.
We get the news here this morning that Garrett Stubbs is going to be optioned out, and so it's going to be Marchand, who's the backup catcher. No more Garrett Stubbs, at least for the time being. A couple different things about this. One, are you at all surprised in any way, shape, or form? Number 2, does this have an impact on the Phillies' game planning, pitching execution, behind-the-scenes stuff that maybe we're not aware of? Number 3, what do you think the future for Garrett Stubbs might actually be? Do you think, barring aside from injury and him coming back up to fill an injury, any shot that he finds his way back to Philadelphia? Is it over? What's about to happen here?
Yeah, I think, and I talked to Stubbs about this down in spring training. I had a good conversation with him about it. And he said, you know what? He said, the situation is what the situation is. He says, I didn't create it. It is what it is. And I'm going to do, no matter if I'm here, or if I'm in AAA, whatever it is, I'm going to remain committed to helping this team in any way that I can. And what I think that just from talking to him, I get the sense, obviously, if there's an injury, he's going to be recalled, right? He's the third catcher now.
Sure.
So if something happens to either Real Muto or Marchand, and look, both of those guys have had some health history stuff in the recent past, so sure. It's conceivable that one of them can get hurt and Stubbs will be back. But even if not, even if Real Muto and Marchand have a healthy season, I think come September, Garrett Stubbs is here, and he's a big part of planning for the playoffs and looking at other teams' lineups and how to attack hitters and sitting in on those pitching meetings. So at the very least, it's only goodbye to Garrett Stubbs to me for 6 months.
Okay, now one follow-up to that. We obviously know how the clubhouse feels about him, how he feels about the clubhouse, how the organization feels about him. We know all that. Did you happen to ask him, and I don't know if you want to share this, even if you did, but would he be open to going elsewhere if a team called the Phillies and said, look, like we need a guy to step in here and play with some regularity at the major league level? Like, would you foresee that being a possibility, or do you think that the Phillies find him too valuable to trade away that depth? Or
I didn't ask Stubbs that question, so I don't know what his answer would be. But I don't think the Phillies will move Garrett Stubbs for the very reason that they don't have that third guy, right? Like, I mean, their next catching prospect is Eduardo Taijuan, who doesn't turn 19 until later this year. So you're talking about a kid who's 3 to 4 years away, which is why, and I think we discussed this on the last episode, I think JT Realmuto will be re-signed even at age 34 because they don't have that next guy, and you're better off with even a declining Realmuto for 1 or 2 seasons until the next guy is ready to come in, and you're not going to bring in a free agent really for 1 or 2 years. It doesn't make a lot of sense if you think you have the next catcher in your system. So with that said, and not having a major league ready or caliber catcher to step in case of an injury, I think that the Phillies think that Stubbs is too valuable, and they want to keep all 3 guys, and this is the best way to do it.
Okay, that's fair. I want to stay true to the DNA of this show, which is negativity. We're in this situation here where we're doing our last full episode of Crossed Up, and so there are a lot of good things that have happened in Clearwater this spring, and I want to talk about them on our new show next week.
Yes.
We have a couple shows that we definitely want to do next week. We'll talk about kind of the full observations of what we have seen this spring. Certainly want your thoughts. You were down there. You spent time with the team. And then we'll do our prediction show and all of that. And then we'll probably do a recap of the opener. Like next week's going to be a busy week for you and I. It's great. I'm looking forward to it. Because we're short on time, I want to close our final big topic point here with some negativity. A lot of good. There's been some bad. And in particular, it has been a rough month of March for Nick Castellanos, Kyle Schwarber, and Trey Turner. And I guess I would like you, a little exercise for you here, rank from highest level of concern to least level of concern, those 3 players heading into the season. And what have you actually seen? Is this just like, don't sweat the numbers, these are 3 veteran guys, who cares? Or is this is this further evidence that there's some deterioration going on, especially with Nick Castellanos and Trey Turner? And Turner specifically, so much has been talked about with him this year. Is he going to hit leadoff? Is he not? Are they going to run him more? Is he going to finally step up and be the guy that they thought he was going to be, or is he going to just be okay? Like, I would like you to dive through all of this, because I'll just say, not terribly optimistic about Mr. Turner.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's the one that concerns me the most, only because of how vested the Phillies are in Trey Turner. So, like, that's the one that concerns me more than anything else. And it's not that. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I thought I lost you for a sec. It's not that I think that he's going to have a bad season by any stretch of the imagination. I just think that he's less than what the Phillies expected they were going to get.
So we get slightly below average defense and a 290 year, 25 homers. He does his thing. He has his months. He has his up months, his down months. Like, that's kind of what we get. Because I know there's this talking point. Like, this is the year you're going to see the real Trey. He's too talented. There's too much here. He's going to be comfortable. He's going to make adjustments. He's going to hit maybe at the top of the order, which I have a thought about here that I'll share in a moment. That'll force him to be a different hitter. It'll get the best out of him. I know a lot of people feel like that's coming. And I know a lot of people are already out on him. Like, turn the page. This guy stinks. Undo the contract. I can't believe we have to do this another 10 years. Like, so there's 2 extreme views of him. You kind of just middle it and say, like, yeah, what he has been is what you will continue to see.
Yeah, but middling it, I don't necessarily look as sitting on the fence on this. Like,
No, I don't think you're sitting on the fence. I'm just saying,
yeah,
like, yeah, you're just going to get a player that's all right, and you're going to be always a little bit underwhelmed by him.
yeah, and that's the thing. And so, like, is that a disappointment? Probably.
Yeah,
I mean, he's going to be a good player, but he's not going to be the superstar that you thought you were getting when you signed him to a $300 million contract. So
yeah.
that one's the most concerning to me. Castellanos becomes the second most concerning. Just because I don't think the Phillies can afford, with their outfield situation, to have Castellanos have the start that he had last year. One of the reasons they were kind of able to get past Castellanos hitting 113 or whatever the hell he hit in April was because they got off to such a fast start and everybody else was hitting. I'm not convinced that this team's going to hit like they did last year at the start of the year, and so therefore he can't have that kind of start. He recognizes it. I'll give him this credit, Bob. There was a game in Bradenton on Tuesday against the Pirates. Veteran players don't usually travel. After Monday's game, he asked Thompson if he could go to Bradenton because he wasn't happy with where his swing was. He wanted to get his timing down. And he goes down there and he hits a home run, right? Which was, good on him. So, like, I give him credit because he's a hard worker and he tries to figure it out. But I do say he cannot have that same April. And then Schwarber, I don't worry about as much because Schwarber's notoriously a slow starter who produces. So if Schwarber has another slow start, but then ends up hitting, 40 home runs or close to 40 home runs and gets on base 375 like he did last year, that's fine. It's okay.
Is Trey Turner hitting leadoff on opening day?
I think so, but I don't think it's a long-term thing.
Okay, because that was my next question. Is Trey Turner hitting leadoff on May 1st?
May 1st, maybe. I don't think if I had to say by the All-Star break, no. I think Schwarber's your leadoff hitter by the All-Star break.
Phillies, assuming a big assumption, but assuming they're in the postseason, Kyle Schwarber's hitting leadoff for a Phillies postseason team again this fall?
Unless they trade for another guy who's a better option. I think there's too much of a gap in on-base percentage between what Schwarber gives you and what Turner gives you. Yeah. Turner's got a higher batting average, but he doesn't walk. And he's got to get on. He's got to get on base. You can't lose that 40 points between those two guys and on base and think it's going to generate more runs. It's just won't.
Do you find it at all? And we talked in our last show about the mindset of the fan base coming into this season and how people might not be quite as fired up. And I admit, I was. I think part of it was the Eagles' hangover. Look. As I've evolved, I grew up. I loved the Phillies. And I still have love for the Phillies. The professional part of it and having been down there and covering it, that really does take away. And I know we've talked about this before. It takes away some of the fandom of it, though. And right. I've kind of come to this point where I feel like I can look at them through a more analytical lens while still wanting them to win for the city, for my friends, like even for myself. Selfish. I want the Phillies to win, right? Like, I mean, let's be honest about it. But I don't know what it is. I feel like a little bit. I'm happy to do this show. I'm excited to talk about it, so I don't want to misconstrue my true feelings here. But isn't it at all a little annoying, the things that we have to talk about with this team as it relates to this team right now? Like, think about our show today. Man, Nick Castellanos is looking a little bit lost up there, and like he's working hard, and hopefully he fights through it. And the Phillies don't really have a leadoff hitter, and Trey Turner's looked pretty inconsistent. He's sort of been swinging a lot of pitches down and away, and I just feel like, holy smokes, it's like the same freaking storyline year after year. Like, I mean, this team has won a lot of games. This is a really good baseball team, and I expect them to be a very good baseball team again this season. But it is interesting to me that here we are on March 20th of 2025, and a lot of the things that we're poking at are things that we've really been poking at now for the better part of the last two seasons. And maybe that's because there's so much turnover in the NFL, and even in baseball, every year is a little bit different, and this team is largely stuck together, so it really is the same cast of characters, more or less. But it is a little bit disheartening, I think, and maybe takes away a little bit of the amped up nature going into this season because we're talking about the same stuff.
Yeah, and I understand it. The only thing that I will say that's to serve as kind of like the opposite view of this is that I do give them credit for saying we don't want to tie ourselves up to going for this for one season and one season only,
Totally
and
agree.
then it doesn't work, and then we have to kind of start over again.
Yeah, it's not so
Whereas,
much. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, yeah. Whereas I think that they're letting this group go till the contracts kind of go out, but they're still keeping and holding on to the young players and feel that they have more flexibility 26 and beyond to keep the window open for the team to win. So
Well,
that's the one thing I'm okay
absolutely.
with.
I
Yeah.
know there's lessons learned from the last run from 07 to 11, and they don't want to tie themselves up. And I get that. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
that from a philosophical standpoint, there's anything wrong with that. I'm not even blaming them for that. I'm just talking about here in this moment, the things that we're talking about can be a little bit deflating, I think, for the average fan going into the season. I also recognize that could change very quickly. You could be talking about this explosion onto the scene from Andrew Painter, and does Crawford come up and make an impact? Or maybe do we see Aiden Miller at some point? Like, maybe they make a big deadline deal because they're right there and they decide, you know what, the right player is available at the right cost. Let's go. Like, a lot can happen this season. It could get, and it will. I believe that we are going to be talking about a lot of new things, but I think just in this particular moment, it's like, all right, well, okay.
Yeah. No, I agree, Bob, and it's going to be a different. It's certainly going to be a different feel with this team this year. There's going to be the microscope is going to be a lot sharper focused.
I'm ready to go.
Yeah, the
I'm ready to
spotlight's going to
go.
be a lot harsher, right? It's going to be that, and deservedly so,
Yeah,
because
because
really,
there was a lot of benefit of the doubt last season.
yeah,
Man, think about it. Like, I'm going to tell you right now, our approach as things weren't always going so smoothly there the last 3 months of the season. It was like, look, it's a veteran team. They've been there before. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I trust these guys. They've been very successful in October despite the
yeah,
failures at the end. They know this is all about the postseason. Like, we did that. Like, I gave them, I thought, a fair amount of the benefit of the doubt. Like, I thought that we talked about the issues, but we said, let's be reasonable here. Let's not freak out. Let's not go overboard. And I'm not saying that we got to go crazy every time something goes wrong this season and that some of those things don't still apply, but the
yeah.
benefit of the doubt is been significantly
No,
reduced this season.
no, it does. It has. To me, this is the last ride for this.
And that's
group.
where I thrive, Anthony. I'm
Yeah.
ready to drop the hammer. Let's go.
Let's do it. Let's drop the hammer. Let's do it. I do have one last thing, Bob, just real quick before we get out, because we just have to have one last thing on our last episode of Crossed Up. It is Phillies related, and I have a question about it. And it's, I don't know if you saw the story about how the Phillies are suing this analytics company, Zealous,
Yes.
for trying to peddle the platform that they helped create to rival teams. I don't know. The Phillies were late to the analytics game to begin with, right? And I'm not 100% sure exactly how much they've developed in the course of the last 3 seasons that has been so proprietary, that it's so unique that nobody else can possibly have figured it out, that if this other company is trying to sell the products that they do, that they shouldn't be allowed to do it. I know that they had an agreement that was exclusive for the last 2 years, that they couldn't sell it to other teams within the National League East. And now the Phillies are suing them. I don't know. I don't know what you're finding at this point at baseball analytics that other teams don't already know. And I think it's a little bit petty, if you want my opinion.
You think the Phillies are being a little bit petty?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the root of this, and I know that there really hasn't been public comment from the data side, and Phillies really haven't said much at all about it. Correct.
Correct.
I think that really what you have here is that you feel like, hey, we're paying you money for exclusivity. And if you feel like, independent of whether or not it really causes irreparable harm or puts you at a competitive disadvantage or is sharing your secrets, I think that if you feel like, hey, we have a one-to-one partnership, and now I see that your focus is elsewhere, not only is there the data breach element of it, but also just the good faith partnership of it. And you say, well, wait a minute, this isn't what we signed up for. And, did you use our relationship to, and you can't blame a business for doing this entirely, but did you use our business to sort of springboard your own? And if that is going to kind of create a gray area, I could see the Phillies wanting to at least put a restraining order in place where they say, like, hold on a second. We're going to let's pump the brakes on this. And are the Phillies going to win a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against this company? I have no idea. Maybe they will. I'm not, legal counsel here. But what I would say is they may be looking at this and saying, like, well, let's either slow this process down so we can really get our hands around it and figure out how the hell we really want to proceed here. Or you might say, like, okay, we feel like that this was done in bad faith. Now we're just going to break your balls. And there could be a little bit of that to it as well. I mean, that would not be unprecedented. So I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know exactly what the proprietary data is. What is it that this company is going to go out and show other rival teams that puts the Phillies at a competitive disadvantage? If I had that knowledge, I might say, oh, yeah. How about it? And, did any of that come from the Phillies' own development on their end that was shared with this company? And they feel like, well, wait a minute, this was collaborative and now you're taking the stuff that we gave you. There's a lot that I don't know about it, so I can't definitively say much about it.
Yeah, no, I get it, Bob. The only thing I can add to this is that, solutions companies, which I used to work for one, frequently operate within the same space with competitors.
Sure.
Now, sometimes you have to, silo stuff out, and that's fine. And the company says that they feel like that they are in complete compliance with the agreement that they had with the Phillies, and of course they're going to say that. But the reality of it is that company in a free market has the right to go and try and get other clients to bolster their business, and the Phillies shouldn't be trying to stop them from doing that. It's not like it's the Phillies. They hired this outside company to do the analytics work. It's not like the Phillies hired people to build this and then that person went and sold secrets. They hired an outside company. So that's where I have a problem with it.
And as the Phillies listen to this, I just want to point out that I still work on behalf of the Crossing Broad parent company, and you do not. So if they're upset with this, please revoke Anthony's credential and not mine.
That's great.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a perfect place to end this. Like, look, there's no need for the long goodbye here or anything, but we do appreciate, obviously, anybody that's listening to this show or has listened over the years. We hope that you guys make the jump over to the new platform with us, Fighting Words, again, with PH. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube. You'll be able to follow along with us on X. We'll have all the updates.
We'll be doing the show live on YouTube. Yeah. That's going to be new. That's going to be a new thing.
Yeah, we'd like to see you be a little bit more interactive. It's going to take some time. I've always had a little bit of pride. We don't have 20,000 followers or listeners, so I don't think we're going to get a stream of commentary. I've always been a little bit embarrassed about that if we do a live show and there's two people in here watching us, but we have enough of a base that we feel good about it. We're looking forward to growing it and trying some new things.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
It'll be fun.
We will have more information out. Actually, I think we'll drop some updates on the channel here on the feed here with further updates too that you can check back on and listen to. So for Anthony Sanfilippo, I am Bob Wankel. We will talk to you soon.